When does a baby become a baby, a human a human? Is it at the moment of conception or at some point down the road? On one side of the argument were those who supported the court's ruling, believing that a woman's right to privacy was the highest priority. But on the other were those who saw abortion as a clear infringement upon an unborn human being's right to life.
The right to choose and reproductive rights is under attack, and the attack is not going to abate anytime soon.
The right to life is not granted by any government or any court of law. As our forefathers correctly understood, it is a right given by a higher jurisdiction, a precious gift from God above.
Less than 200 years after America set out to form a more equal and perfect union, the United States Supreme Court dramatically altered that course with its 1973 landmark decision to legalize abortion. The Roe v. Wade ruling sent shockwaves through society, dividing the nation in the most bitter dispute since the Civil War.
Pro-life, that's a lie, you don't care if women die! Pro-life, that's a lie, you don't care if women die!
Today, over 30 years have passed since the Roe decision, but the pivotal question remains. Is an individual's right to life something that can be given and taken away in a court of law, as the Roe decision would imply? And what are the consequences of abortion for women? These questions and more will be answered during the next hour as we look at the faces of abortion.
Well, the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision really came out of a case involving Norma McCorvey, and it had to do with the issue of abortion. Now, the attempt really was to see if you could begin to come up with some kind of national strategy for abortion, because you had certain states which had very liberal abortion laws, New York and California, had other states that had very conservative abortion laws, like the state of Texas. So the idea was to see if you could at least loosen up some of those laws.
Roe and Doe are the two cases that brought abortion to America, and they both began in 1970 within a couple of months of each other. The Roe case began in April 1970 in Dallas, Texas, where Norma McCorvey, our client, the Roe of Roe v. Wade, lived at the time. And the Doe v. Bolton case started later in Atlanta, Georgia, a couple of months later, where Sandra Cano, the Doe of Doe v. Bolton, also our client, lived at that time.
Both of those women want to see their cases reversed. They've lived in, Norma McCorvey, for example, worked in the abortion movement, worked in abortion facilities. One of her jobs was to put all the pieces of the babies back together to make sure they got all the baby parts after an abortion. And so she became a Christian, God saved her, and now she wants to see her case reversed. Sandra Cano, on the other hand, she never wanted an abortion. She actually fled from Georgia, and it was her lawyer and her mother that wanted her to have an abortion. Such is the myth of a choice for women. It's something that is usually chosen for women by other people, by boyfriends and mothers and brothers and sisters and family members, and forced on women. After she agreed that she would not have to have an abortion. It's only after her mother and her lawyer said, no, you don't have to have an abortion, that she came back to Georgia and sat in the courtroom, didn't say a word while her case proceeded.
Now, Norma McCorvey actually did not have an abortion, but she was the individual, the Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade, that caused the court to consider that case. And everybody, even those who were trying to loosen the restrictions on abortion, were surprised when the court came down 7-2 to basically overthrow all laws having to do with abortion. Now, they did have some disclaimers. They said that if indeed you had viability, after viability, then you could have a compelling state interest. So certain states could begin to limit abortion. And so in certain states, like the state of Texas, you actually have a ban on third trimester abortions. But by and large, what it did was completely remove all the abortion laws that existed in the states. And it was based upon a fiction, because it was based on the assumption that Norma McCorvey, the Jane Roe in the case, had an abortion. Actually, she had not.
I don't think there's any scientific way to prove when life begins. I believe personally that life begins as something that we should value when a mother chooses to keep her child. I believe that that is when, because a zygote is not viable on its own, and when the mother decides to keep their child and support it and to start adjusting her life to support that child, I believe that is when, personally, that's my belief when life begins.
When does life begin? And this is a classic illustration of where the Supreme Court said, we're not going to decide when life begins. One of the key sentences in Roe v. Wade says that when the theologians and doctors and others cannot come to any consensus about when life begins, we, as the judiciary, are not in a state to answer the question. And so basically they decided not to decide when life begins, which I think violates one of the foundational principles of Western jurisprudence. The philosophy is, when in doubt, don't. If you don't know there's life in the womb, you should assume there is life in the womb. If you don't know that a person who is brought into an emergency room is alive or dead, you assume that they're alive unless you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt they're not. In the criminal justice system, we have the same kind of philosophy. You're assumed to be innocent, and then you have to prove an individual to be guilty. But the Supreme Court decided not to make a decision about when life begins, overturned 50 different laws, some which had very strict regulations on abortion, some which were very liberal, but it overturned all those 50 state laws on a fiction, and that is the assumption that we do not need to decide when life begins.
At the age of 16, I married and gave birth to a son. 1 year later, I learned I was pregnant again. It was 1978 and abortion had been legal 5 years. The words "free pregnancy test" drew me into the clinic. I left that day believing that what was inside of me was tissue, and that through a procedure called abortion, that untimely pregnancy could be quickly and safely removed.
If legitimate scientists who follow the scientific method and are able to determine without the intervention of religion or the influence of religion on their decision, it's just a pure science, then yes, I think that'd be interesting.
In Roe v. Wade, it specifically says, at this state in the development of man's knowledge, we do not know when human life begins. Well, there's been an explosion in the development of man's knowledge since 1973. Human cloning was not even conceived of in 1973. The Human Genome Project, recombinant DNA technology, just DNA testing itself. If you took a sample of a DNA from a woman's arm, her left arm and her right arm, and sent it to a DNA lab anonymously, they'd come back and say, this is the same human being. If you took one from her arm and the embryo, even, in her womb, they would tell you, these are two separate human beings. No question about it. No theory, no theology, just pure science.
Because of medical technology, a beating heart can be detected in the womb within a matter of weeks. Early sonograms show that life, that human life in its most precious form, is evident and very fast developing inside that womb. Moms and dads can see those little hands and see those little feet. They can count every finger and every toe. They can even watch that little one suck his or her thumb. Today, while emerging scientific breakthroughs are giving new hope to the sick and the critically injured, it also raises new questions in the ethical debate about life, new challenges that we must overcome to protect life.
I object to a zygote being called a baby. I think we need to seriously look at the vocabulary here. A 3-week-old zygote is not a baby.
You're asking me what I believed at that time. At that time, I tried I tried to believe it was a blob of tissue, and I did believe it until, I think I pressured myself to thinking that until we got to that abortion mill. And when I saw the sign, "Save your baby," there the conflict came. And all of a sudden I thought, honey, they don't know what we're doing. They don't know why we're here. But I'll never forget the girl that was sitting beside me in the recovery room. And I say recovery room, it was just a place that they put you in, and you're sitting there in your gown, and you're aching and you're hurting. And I remember the girl beside me said, "What was yours, a boy or a girl?" And I went, "Oh." You know, and then it just gripped me. I thought, oh God, how can she even talk that way? Because I wasn't thinking that until 12 years later.
Well, clearly, biologically, there really isn't much confusion about that. Life begins at conception when sperm and egg meet, because at that point you now have a new human individual. It's not some other form of animal life, it's clearly human life from that point of conception. And the reason that's so is because you have the union of sperm and egg, and each of those two cells has half the number of chromosomes, 23 in each. And when sperm and egg unite, then the two nuclei from those two cells now migrate together, and when they blend and they form a new nucleus that now has the 46 human chromosomes in that, that flips a biochemical switch in this newly formed zygote that begins a cascade of events that, as long as that zygote remains in the proper environment and receives nutrition it needs, will result in a baby 9 months later. And so you have a new member of the human species right from that point. And one of the other evidences for that is as that zygote begins to divide into more and more cells, first 1, then 2, 4, 8, 16, 32 cells, at about 5 or 7 days after fertilization, the embryo begins to differentiate a little bit. You get an outer circle of cells, and you get an inner cell mass, and that inner cell mass eventually is what becomes the baby. But what I want to talk about right now is that our outer ring of cells that eventually becomes the placenta. When it gets down into the womb, it merges with the womb, and then the placenta forms. What many people don't understand is that the placenta is primarily fetal tissue. It's from the baby. Now, the placenta's major function involves the exchange of nutrients and waste products from the mother's body, from the mother's bloodstream. But another major function for the placenta is that it acts as an immune barrier to the mother's immune system. A lot of times you'll hear the notion that the baby is just the developing fetus, it's just a part of the mother's body. Well, biologically, that simply is not true. And the proof of that is in this immunological response of the placenta, because the mother would recognize this foreign body as foreign tissue, and her immune system would attack it and kill it and eliminate it from the body unless the placenta was there, which is fetal tissue, doing its immunological job to protect the baby from the mother's immune system. So the biological facts clearly indicate that this is a separate, unique individual. It's not a part of the mother's body, and biologically you simply can't make that argument.
Also, it is reasonable to conclude that the embryo is a human life. Outside of the womb, we would consider it human life. So, you think about it reasonably, using logic. If it's a human being outside of the womb, it's a human being inside of the womb. Just because it is inside, it eventually becomes a human. Therefore, if it's a human outside of the womb, it's logic and reason would allow us to conclude it's a human inside of the womb. It's a very reasonable and logical conclusion.
If you look at medical evidence, again, we know that from the moment of conception, you're talking about someone who is genetically distinct from the mother and is not a piece of protoplasm, not just a piece of the mother or an appendix or things like that. So whether you look at biblical issues, whether you look at medical issues, whether you look at legal issues, I think you can see very clearly that we are dealing with a human being inside the womb that deserves protection and should be protected by the Constitution and by various laws and judicial remedies.
You know, it's a touchy subjective area, and I have my opinion. My opinion is that abortion needs to be safe, legal. I don't want to go back to the days of coat hanger abortions. I don't want to go back to the days of air embolisms killing women in abortions. I don't want to go back to the days of having coat hangers used in abortions and penetrating the brain cavity and causing permanent disfiguring disability. Abortion has risks. Every medical procedure has risks. Even today, abortion has risks attached to it. But it's so much safer than when we had just back alley abortions.
When I got to the abortion facility, there was a woman who was counseling me, she said, "You seem sad," and I started to cry. She gave me a white pill, which I now know is a tranquilizer, and said, "Take this, it'll make you feel better." After that, I was pretty much out of it. I don't know how I got on the abortionist table, but all I remember is the pain, the most excruciating pain I've ever felt when the abortion started. After the abortion, the whole faculty just fled, and I was left in a pool of blood. I was in the recovery room. I was vomiting. The 3 or 4 women sitting next to me who just aborted their babies were comforting me while the staff was just sitting at the table.
And what I remember from that day was the pain was so horrendous that I passed out. As a matter of fact, they asked me several times, "How far along are you?" Yet to this day, I have no memory of faces. But when I awoke, I was covered in blood, sweat, and I was numb and in shock. I was only 18. I went home, and I bled for the next 3 days. I didn't know that was called hemorrhaging.
And I was not told that I could possibly bleed to death, because that's actually what happened to me. And when I got home, I remember parts of the baby started coming out, and I hemorrhaged right in my kitchen floor. I was never followed up on by that abortion clinic. And I began to cry myself to sleep every night for 12 years.
And what we have really done in the United States is to legalize back alley abortion. We've made it legal for these clinics to operate in the ways that you have just heard described. Pushing women out the back door still bleeding. That's not right, and it's not just. And it's time to return this issue to the states and legislatures and the people of America, not be decided by fiat by 9 people in this building.
But in 1999, we started getting women who'd been hurt by abortion came to us. These were women who'd actually had very severe physical injuries because a janitor at the abortion clinic had started performing abortions and pocketing the money and not telling the abortionist that they were doing it. He worked with the bookkeeper, who was his wife, and they scheduled abortions when the doctor wasn't there. So they butchered a lot of women, obviously, which also occurs sometimes by regular doctor abortionists also. When we started helping the women, we found out there wasn't much that could be done. Eventually, the 2 did go to jail for prescribing drugs without a license when they gave a prescription after the abortion. But the Department of Health couldn't do much.
When these post-abortive ladies came to us, who were significantly injured, some of them were sterile, one almost died through sepsis, and we discovered things like one lady's had her abortion performed by the janitor at the facility. They scheduled them on weekends because they were so unregulated. And the janitor and the secretary in the facility were scheduling abortions on the weekends when the doctors weren't there and performing the abortions. And then we found a lot of other things out about how the facilities were very, very poorly regulated.
There's been a countless number of women who have died from legalized abortion, and the mainstream media never reports any of that. They never report any abortionists like Tiller the Killer in Wichita, Kansas. He just had another one of his patients that was in there for a PBA go to the hospital, and I don't know if she made it through the night or not.
911 Wichita.
Yes, this is Dr. Tiller's office. We need an ambulance.
Yeah, what's the address?
It's 5107 East Kellogg, but please, 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 no lights and no sirens.
Ma'am, I can't control that. And what's the problem? Tell me exactly what happened.
Okay, this is the correct number for the ambulance, right?
Yes, ma'am. What's the problem? Tell me exactly what happened.
Okay, all I know is that it's a patient who has to go to the hospital.
Okay, for what reason, ma'am?
Hold on just a moment and I'll find out, please.
AMEW.
Sir, I'm sorry, I don't have that information. All I know is that we need a transport to the hospital.
So you have no information as to why?
No, sir, I don't. I was asked to call.
Okay, so do you need the police over there?
Oh, no, no, no.
Well, see, that's why we ask these questions, so we know how to respond and what units to respond.
Well, since 1973, we've had a few things happen. Obviously, first of all, we've had 40 million abortions, and even those who were moving for, quote, abortion rights saw this get out of hand. Most did not expect that you would move from, the best estimates are probably less than 100,000 illegal abortions, maybe even less than 50,000 illegal abortions in the country every year, to 1.5 million abortions every year. So first of all, you can see that we'd moved abortion far down the road. Number two, there was always the assumption that because we legalized abortion, that every child would be wanted. In other words, child abuse would go down. Well, actually, child abuse has gone up. We assume that there would not be medical complications to abortion. We can see all sorts of medical complications that have gone up. We've seen psychological complications. So the great hope that legalized abortion would reduce many of these social factors and reduce the number of complications, both medically and emotionally, to women actually have turned out not to be the case.
The court did not know in 1973 what the effect of widespread legalized abortion would be on women. It was rare and illegal in most places. A few states had begun to liberalize their abortion laws. Now we know that abortion hurts women, and these psychological injuries, which are so devastating, are beginning to come forward, and we now have a large amount of evidence on that.
Years, 3 clinics, 2 states, 7 abortions. Never was I once told of my physical, my emotional, my mental potential complications that I would face as a woman who chose. I was not forced. I chose to exercise my American right to choose. But they never told me, Joyce, bilateral mammograms, ovarian cysts, the delivery of my last pregnancy of my baby. I have 5 children. I was in bed for 5 months and lost 2 pints of blood, a partial hysterectomy at the birth of my daughter. Do you know what it's like to have to look in your children's eyes and to tell them, Mommy may die? But to then know it's because I chose to exercise my right to choose, because you see, this was my 12th pregnancy. The emotional complications have been just tremendous. Mental anguish, I can't tell you what it's like to grieve the emptiness of your arms, knowing what you did to your children.
At first, I was in denial for a long time. The depression, guilt, emptiness, and sorrow lasted for 23 years. I experienced guilt, emptiness, unhealthy relationships, long crying spells, panic attacks, difficulties in making decisions, emotional numbness, failed marriages, a miscarriage, strange physical illnesses, and spiritual emptiness. I believed that I deserved to be punished for a lifetime. I didn't deserve happiness for what I had done. Not knowing it at the time, I had truly been hurt by abortion. Because I had experienced an unplanned pregnancy, unfortunately, I also ended up experiencing the tragedy of abortion.
In my 4th abortion in Glendale, California, they called me and they said, "We don't think we got it all." And I didn't know at that time that what they did was that they looked at the head and the torso and the 2 legs and the 2 arms to determine that they had gotten the completion of my baby. I did not know that. So hardened as I was by my 4th abortion, I said, "What do you think, you left a leg or something in me?" It's been 14 years since my last abortion. And it's been a week and a half since my last nightmare of my abortions. My daughter and I drove past a church with 1,000 crosses in the front yard, and I pulled over knowing what it was representing. And we picked up the crosses and planted them back into the ground. And I told my daughter, my 4-year-old daughter, what I had done. And that she had brothers and sisters that her mommy didn't allow to live. And she said, I miss my brothers and sisters. And I said, I do too, honey. I'm so sorry. And she said, it's okay, Mommy. But it's not okay with me.
They told me it was a blob of tissue. They lied. I grieved the baby I lost. They told me that this was the best thing for me. They lied. My abortion devastated me emotionally, physically, and psychologically. They told me I would not regret my decision. They lied. I regret the loss of my baby every day of my life. I was never told I would suffer subsequent miscarriages. I had 5. I was never told that an abortion might result in a subsequent unhealthy baby. I had a special needs son who died at the age of 7. I was never told that the trauma of my experience would live with me over and over and over and over, and that the regrets and the guilt would drain me day and night. And I sought solace in denial. And my denial brought about rage. And my rage brought about severe relationship issues with my husband, with my children, with my family. Having an abortion ended the life of my unborn baby, and it ended the normal semblance of a life that I had previously known. Having an abortion didn't end my problems like they said it would. They lied. It was just the beginning of my problems. And I want America to know this, that many women like me take years to understand and acknowledge their grief after an abortion. Like me, they go into denial. And different events can trigger the acknowledgement. The death of my 7-year-old son triggered mine. And living through that grieving experience made me realize that I had actually been grieving the loss of my baby 13 years prior. For 13 years, I thought that emotional consequences were only for weak women, not for strong women like me. For 13 years, I thought that I had escaped the brutal ravages of abortion. For 13 years, I remained silent in my shame. But I will remain silent no more. There are hurting women like I was who are walking wounded, and they are wounded from their guilt, they are wounded from their shame, they are wounded with despondency. And we need to realize that America gave us this fatal choice, and now she needs to hear our voice. And the abortion industry will continue to lie, with the blood on their hands and the cash in their pockets, that terminating a pregnancy doesn't have severe lifelong consequences. But I will scream the truth from the rooftops if I have to, that abortion hurts women, abortion brings torment, abortion exploits women, and abortion victimizes women.
You know, 32 years ago, you heard that Norma and Sandra did not testify in court. There was no trial. There was no hearing. There were no facts. There was nothing but a bunch of assumptions that rose to the level of nothing other than rank speculation. There's been 32 years of experimentation with abortion in this country, experimenting with the lives and the health and the rights of women, and of course, the lives of their children. It's no longer speculation. We now have the facts. And the assumptions that Roe v. Wade made are now known to be false. Roe was based on a bunch of assumptions, and it's time that the court look at the truth, hear the truth, embrace the truth, and America should embrace the truth and never fear it. Roe assumed that the woman lost nothing of benefit to herself. We now know the truth is that she loses her greatest right in all of life. Roe assumed that abortion was safe. We now know that abortion is inherently dangerous. It's dangerous to the women. It's dangerous to the physical well-being, to the mental well-being. Roe assumed that abortion was liberating. The truth is that after 32 years of experimentation, we now know that abortion has enslaved women in this country.
Abortion is a short-term solution with long-term negative consequences. And so there are three major reasons why we believe Roe v. Wade needs to be overturned and that the Supreme Court needs to hear this case. First of all, this is a case of exceptional national importance that affects the physical and psychological health of millions of women each year. It squarely presents to the court the question of whether prospective application of Roe v. Wade remains just and equitable in light of what we now know from 32 years of abortion experience. 32 years later, the court now has before it evidence in medical science and technology that was not available in 1973. And although this court believed at the time it was helping women, the evidence before it now proves that abortion hurts women and a change needs to take place.
When Alan and I first got started, we had this kind of running conversation between the two of us that, well, we have to do something about abortion if we're going to talk about justice. I mean, it is the justice issue of our day. And I wrote memos to Alan and said, Alan, we've got to do something about abortion. And Alan he and I would have these conversations, and he, you know, basically he'd say, well, you can't do anything about abortion. It's too strong. You know, there's no way you can take it on. And but one thing led to another, and first of all, we had some post-abortive women that came to us who had been seriously injured, and they couldn't get satisfaction in the courts, and we discovered that abortion facilities were less regulated than barbershops and veterinary clinics.
So we worked on abortion facility regulations in Texas, and we began to see what could be done.
Well, we brought suit against the state of Texas. We sued 55 different state agencies on behalf of 8 women, and the result was, along with some effort by legislators in Texas, Frank Court particularly, I have to give recognition to, we were able to get some of the best abortion facility regulations in America for Texas. In fact, other states are looking at Texas as a model now.
Inside this very building, we have won some very important battles, important victories in promoting a culture of life, protecting our children's future. I'm very proud of what Phil King and his colleagues have done in this building. They've taken significant steps to welcome more children to life, protect them in our laws.
Also, about the year 2000, around about that time, Norma McCorvey and Sandra Cano became the clients of the Justice Foundation. And Alan can go into the stories of how that happened, involving snowstorms and, you know, things that were very unusual. And we began to work for them, represent them legally.
Around January of the year 2000, I had the opportunity to go and speak at a conference that Harold Cassidy was putting on in Washington, D.C., right after the March for Life. And I met Norma at the March for Life, and I said, Norma, I have a feeling you're going to be involved in overturning Roe v. Wade. And she said, that's what I live for. And then we just kind of parted company. I shook her hand. There was a huge snowstorm that night, though, and Norma was not able to leave town like she thought, so she had to stay an extra day, and she went to the conference, unbeknownst to me, and listened to me speak there, and I guess was impressed in her mind with what she heard. And I didn't know that, but on the way back to San Antonio from Washington, D.C., you have to go through Dallas, and while I was sitting in the Dallas airport, the idea came to me that Norma, because she was Roe of Roe v. Wade, an actual party to the litigation, could file a Rule 60 motion to reopen the case and set it aside on the grounds it's no longer just. We then filed a motion here in Dallas on June 17, 2003, to reverse Roe v. Wade. Because Norma was a party under the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, Rule 60, she could file such a motion. And we filed it with over 1,000 affidavits from women who had abortions. We filed over 5,347 pages of evidence, and we presented new factual and legal conditions to the Supreme Court.
We filed the testimonies in writing of over 1,000 post-abortive women detailing their pain, their suffering, their emotional, physical, their spiritual, psychological injuries. We also had an amicus brief filed by pregnancy care centers that said that they have 100,000 women in post-abortion recovery ministries and counseling in America.
So I started reading Norma McCorvey's book, Who Was the Roe of Roe v. Wade? And it was an amazing story of her becoming pro-life, first by working in abortion clinics and beginning to see the problems that women really experienced in abortion clinics. It's not the clean, beautiful woman's choice that the abortion proponents make it out to be. She saw women crying in the recovery room. And as I've done this work, and I've talked with so many women, and you could talk to any abortionist who would tell you, there's a lot of crying that goes on in recovery rooms. You don't have that after a woman removes her tonsils, or she removes a skin cancer, a piece of tissue. But a baby is more than a piece of tissue. Texas Monthly did a magazine story on a woman who had an abortion in Texas, and even there, at the end of this story in Texas Monthly, she's crying in the recovery room, and she says to the reporter, I asked my baby to forgive me last night. I mean, what kind of medical procedure is it that you have to ask your baby, whom you're killing, to forgive you? Anyway, I've become very familiar with this tragedy of abortion in women's lives. And Norma then worked in abortion clinics and saw this firsthand, and her conscience began to bother her. She began to hear flowers crying when there were no cries. And I believe that was her conscience. And then Operation Rescue moved in next door to her abortion clinic. So you have Operation Rescue on one side and Norma McCorvey, the Hellcat, and she'd say the same thing at the time, spitting blood and spitting anger and spitting obscenities at Operation Rescue.
And now she wants to see her case reversed. Sandra Cano, on the other hand, she never wanted an abortion. She actually fled from Georgia.
In February 11th of the year 2000, Sandra Cano called us and asked us to represent her. Now she's the Doe of Doe v. Bolton, the companion case to Roe v. Wade. And she poured out an incredible story of fraud and deception in her case.
And it was her lawyer and her mother that wanted her to have an abortion. Such is the myth of a choice for women. It's something that is usually chosen for women by other people, by boyfriends and mothers and brothers and sisters and family members, and forced on women after she agreed that she would not have to have an abortion. It's only after her mother and her lawyer said, no, you don't have to have an abortion, that she came back to Georgia and sat in the courtroom, didn't say a word while her case proceeded. So the Georgia case was really a fraud on the court itself.
I am Sandra Cano. I was Mary Doe of Doe versus Bolton. Doe versus Bolton legalized late-term abortion and was decided the same day as Roe v. Wade. My case is based on deceit and fraud. The truth is, I have never supported abortion. I have never had an abortion. I was never given the opportunity to speak out in a court of law. Not one judge or attorney asked me how or what I felt about abortion.
Norma wanted an abortion, but she too was really very deceptive, and she testified about that in an affidavit that she supplied the Supreme Court.
Now in Sandra's case, on the other hand, she never wanted an abortion. Her mother wanted an abortion for her because she didn't think she could take care of the child. But Sandra's never wanted to kill a child. And in fact, during the pendency of the lawsuit, her mother packed her bags and said, "Tomorrow you're going to get an abortion." Because in Georgia, they already had a liberal abortion law where you could get a therapeutic abortion for a woman's health. This was the way it was sold in the early years. Texas banned abortion except to save the life of the mother. We had a strict law that was passed in 1854 originally. But Georgia had a liberal, modern statute. I don't remember the exact year it was passed, but either the 60s or 70s. It's probably early 60s. And if 3 doctors agreed that you needed an abortion for the woman's health, you could get one. But she went to Oklahoma to avoid having that abortion. And they said, if you come back and sit through the trial, you won't have to have an abortion. So her lawyer really committed fraud on the court, and Sandra never wanted that. But the court didn't know it because a pseudonym or false name, Mary Doe, was used, and it was a summary judgment procedure, which is done on written documents only, no live testimony, no cross-examination of the witnesses, nothing. The state didn't even know who she was. And it really bothers Sandra that her case brought something she never would have done. And her name is sort of associated it, but it was all a fraud, associated with it, but it was all a fraud. And she wants to overcome that. So these 2 cases together worked their way up from Texas and Georgia and got to the Supreme Court at the same time. And they combined them and made them companion cases. So even today, we can be successful in either the Roe v. Wade case or the Doe v. Bolton case and overturn both cases. And that's one of the reasons we filed them in different places, so you would have different time periods going on and perhaps 2 chances to be successful. My name is Alan Parker. I am the president of the Justice Foundation, based in San Antonio, Texas, and I've had the great honor of representing Norma McCorvey for the past 5 years. We first met in the year 2000, and we discussed filing a motion on her behalf to reverse Roe v. Wade. We collected evidence for 3 years from women who'd had abortions, because we felt there was something that the Supreme Court didn't know in 1973 that it needed to know in order to evaluate Roe v. Wade. And that is that abortion actually causes severe damage to women, both psychologically, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, when they take the life of their own child. We then filed a motion here in Dallas on June 17, 2003, to reverse Roe v. Wade. Because Norma was a party under the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, Rule 60, she could file such a motion. And we filed it with over 1,000 affidavits from women who had abortions. We filed over 5,347 pages of evidence, and we presented new factual and legal conditions to the Supreme Court. We always knew that it would be a very difficult burden to get the Supreme Court to reverse Roe v. Wade and even to reevaluate Roe v. Wade. And today we were sadly disappointed when the United States Supreme Court declined to take the petition to reverse Roe v. Wade. That does not mean they reaffirmed Roe v. Wade. It simply means the court declined to look at the issue at all. In effect, the court turned a blind eye to the evidence that we presented to them.
Well, as Alan said, the decision has no legal binding effect. It's not a decision that affirms Roe v. Wade. It just says that the Supreme Court refuses to look at the evidence.
I've done everything that I've known how to do as a mortal to try to overturn Roe versus Wade. We've talked to I don't know how many churches in the very early years when we were on the road. Sometimes we could get our foot in the door, and sometimes we couldn't. Sometimes we just couldn't get any sleep because our flights were very early. And we've been spit at and cussed at. We've been rebuked, but we've kept on going. And they can't use my name anymore because it's no longer Roe versus Wade. It's just, I believe Alan said this at the news conference, it's the Supreme Court versus the world.
By this action, Norma McCorvey has done everything she can legally to reverse her own case. The Supreme Court can no longer say they did it for Norma McCorvey. They're doing it for themselves. It needs to be called Supreme Court of the United States versus American Women, because Norma has no part of it any longer. She's washed her hands and cleansed her hands of the blood of the innocents, and she has done everything in her power legally to reverse this case that was brought in her name originally, and now the shame of it rests on the Supreme Court of the United States.
One of the things about the abortion debate that I've noticed is we really have kind of a changing agenda for the abortion debate and a changing arena. The arena is changing because it's moving from a national debate pretty much to a state and local debate. Various states have actually put restrictions on abortion, third trimester abortion, partial birth abortion restrictions. Sometimes they've had 24-hour waiting periods, informed consent. So the arena is changing, but the agenda is changing even more so, because what is happening is abortion, which used to be seen kind of as the lesser of all evils. When I've debated an abortionist, even they will oftentimes say, well, this isn't a good thing, but it's what we need to provide for a woman with a crisis pregnancy. But even they sort of have this sense of ambivalence about it. But now, because of the advent of fetal tissue experimentation, stem cell research, cloning, and a variety of other things, it's being portrayed as the greatest good. So we have kind of two issues happening simultaneously. On the one hand, it's being portrayed as perhaps the greatest benefit, if not to the mother, maybe to the quality of life of other individuals, at the same time when there is growing opposition to abortion. That is, the younger you are, the more likely you are to be pro-life. It is one of the most intriguing things, if you look at the social statistics, to show that the younger generation is very pro-life in many ways, and that there are a number of legal challenges down the road which eventually might overturn Roe versus Wade.
Well, after 5 years, our petition to reverse Roe v. Wade was denied by the Supreme Court today. And we had collected over 1,000 affidavits from women who've had abortions. We filed over 5,000 pages of evidence, and the Supreme Court said, we're not going to listen to you. Now, that does not mean they reaffirmed Roe v. Wade. They simply said, we're not going to open it up, we're not going to look at it. And they turned a blind eye to the evidence. But the evidence that was collected will continue to be used, because we have filed the same evidence in Doe v. Bolton. And that case is still at the Atlanta Federal District Court, and it is still on its way back to the Supreme Court. It's already had an amazing journey in that it has stayed at the District Court for a year and a half. Whereas the other case, Roe, went all the way from the District Court to the Supreme Court in a year and a half. Doe has been kept at the District Court level. And we're going to continue to bring that case forward. We're going to continue to collect affidavits. We're going to continue to have women speak out about how abortion hurts women. We're going to continue to educate America. We're going to continue to work for better judges on the Supreme Court. And we're going to see Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton, its companion case, overturned.
I believe that the decision of the Supreme Court not to hear this case is a decision that will live in infamy for our nation. That it will be, if you will, a turning point or a watershed in the history of our land. We have already destroyed 1/3 of a generation. The most common surgical procedure in America today is abortion. 1 in 3 of a generation have not seen the light of day. And God is just.
Christians need to be aware that abortion is the taking of a life. You know, a lot of them don't really understand that abortion is the taking of a life. And a lot of them don't understand the procedures in abortion, just how barbaric and how cruel they are to the fetus. If they would educate themselves and really understand what abortion is and the procedures that are involved, I think they'd have a whole different attitude.
I think our Father in heaven is grieved. He is the author of life. He writes the first stroke in the life, or the book of life, for individuals and to see as women like myself, based upon a law that was given to us 32 years ago, to say it's good, it's simple, it's fast, it's quick, it gives you the answers you're looking for. I think his heart is greatly grieved, and that more importantly that he is a God who wants for his children to reach up and to crawl into his lap and to know that they too can grieve the loss of their children, including children who have been destroyed by abortion. But he is a God who stands for justice, for righteousness, and that we live in a time that we are going to experience that justice and righteousness.
Things happen when innocent blood is shed. Now, when Noah, right after he settled in with the ark, or after the flood, God gave a promise to Noah that he was not going to sin. He put the rainbow in the sky. I'm not going to flood everything again. But he also then said, you be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. But he said, if you shed blood by man, if whoever sheds man's blood, by man will their blood be shed. And then God said 3 times that he will call into an account for innocent blood being shed. Well, this nation has shed innocent blood of 46 million babies, and a number of women who have died. And that blood is crying out from the ground to God, and God is going to demand an accounting of this nation for that blood.
Yeah, you see that throughout the Bible, where there are wicked and immoral societies. God extends his grace in sending them messages of warning, constantly speaking through the prophets, calling cultures and societies to repentance. And when they do not respond, God's grace and perseverance does not extend endlessly. Eventually, his judgment must come because he is a righteous and just God. And that ought to concern all of us. God has been very gracious in blessing the United States, but the slaughter of 40 million unborn children, God's justice and his judgment will not extend endlessly. As we see in the Bible, it would be consistent that if he did bring judgment upon the United States for the murder of 40 million unborn children, it would be consistent with what he has done throughout in judging cultures throughout the Bible.
The good news is, and this is why the gospel of Jesus Christ is such good news, is that the blood of Jesus, shed from the foundation of the world, has the power to purge from all sin, all unrighteousness, all blood guiltiness, to pay the price for the murderer and for even a nation that has allowed the murder to go on, and cleanse a nation from that unrighteousness.
I'm Alveda King, founder of King for America and the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who once said that the Negro cannot win if he's willing to sacrifice the life of his children for personal comfort and safety. I made the choice to have my second abortion right after Roe versus Wade. And that abortion, the real truth is the abortion hurt me. It hurt my living children. I'm the mother of 6. They often say, well, Mommy, you killed our brothers or sister. Did you want to kill me too? And I've had to answer that and pray I suffered in silence for 10 years until 1983 when I was born again, and the Lord Jesus rescued me from the private pain and began to let me go out and talk about my abortion. And people would say, why do you do that? Keep it to yourself. But every time I've done it, I've met women and even some men who have said, thank you for telling that truth, and thank you for saving my baby. Some people have decided not to abort just hearing our testimonies, and I'm very grateful for that.
Clearly, as a Christian, we cannot participate in abortion in any way whatsoever. If someone was called upon to write a prescription for an abortifacient, I think they should refuse. If they were told to abort their child, they should refuse. If a young girl or a woman is being forced to have an abortion, they should decline that and even run away if necessary. Beyond that, we need to continue to pray for the court. We need to cry out to God to change the hearts of America. I believe God could very easily say, I gave you one more chance, and now, unfortunately, I have to withdraw my hand of protection and use judgment to shake America back to its senses, to return it to the foundation on which this nation was built. And I don't know when or how God will do that. That's the providence of God. Our job is to obey, to pray, and to continue to speak the truth in love. We must speak the truth in love. If you would like to be involved in supporting the work of the Justice Foundation, if you want to help women be healed from the hurts of abortion, then contact the Justice Foundation at operationoutcry.org, our website, or call us 1-866-4-OUTCRY. That's 1-866, the number 4, OUTCRY. We'd love to contact you. We'd love to visit with you. We need your help, both prayerfully and financially, in order to accomplish this work.